Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today it is the 14th of July, and last night, it's nearly been 24 hours since then. July 13th really will go down in the history books as a day of infamy. 20, 30 years from now, when we're looking at history books, the photos that have been etched into our memories from last night will be present for, the coming generations. And so I do want to discuss in the beginning of the video the attempted assassination on former President Trump, and we're going to do it in a way that goes through the sequential order of the events, less so the surrounding commentary, but the actual facts, including geolocations and all the positioning, which I think is very important for us as we go forward and want to have more conversations about the aftermath of that particular event. And although it's not necessarily related to my frontline updates, which I will get to today, because there are frontline updates around Krasnohorivka, Novoselivka Persha, Rozdolivka, and further north around Vovchansk and Hlyboke. There definitely is a certain relation that you guys are all aware of when we look at American politics in the way that it affects the war in Ukraine. So I do think that it is fitting every now and then, especially when we have these sort of events, to take a broader look at the world and at the way in which it is getting changed, both internally in America and then the way that it influences foreign policy, for instance, in an area like Ukraine. And so today we're going to start off by looking at Butler County in Pennsylvania. I think it has like 190,000 citizens, so it's a relatively small county. And we're looking at this Trump rally that occurred last night just west of the town of Butler, which has like 13,000 residents. And so the actual event occurred here at the Butler Farms show. And I'm going to zoom in and show you guys in particular where Trump was standing and where the crowd was. And so you had Trump and his podium located exactly at this point here that I marked with the blue marker. Everything here is blue, but I will make it very clear with the different colors. And then, of course, in every single Trump rally, you have behind him this sort of stand with the most ardent supporters that the cameras show to everybody. And so they were basically standing here. And actually, as you're going to see in a second, some of the people that were wounded, they were targeted in this exact location that I'm going over in green. And then in terms of the rest of the audience, which I think is in the thousands, low thousands, if I'm not mistaken, they're essentially within this purple perimeter. The entrance is a bit further west. You can't really see it on the map. Here you can see it at this T-junction on a Fairground Road. You sort of go into Main Street, and then you reach the actual grounds of the sort of field here where all of the sort of people that were designated to enter went in and listened to Trump's speech. And so the rally grounds was actually here. And then you have this sort of fenced up area, which I believe is within this green perimeter over here. And it sort of divides the Trump rally from the outside facilities because, this region is filled with manufacturing sites, barns, and other structures, residential areas nearby. And so even though they are in very close proximity to Trump's speech, they're not actually within the grounds of the rally. And that plays a role in where the security apparatus is actually stationed. And then that can help us answer some of the questions surrounding why there weren't certain police or Secret Service in certain areas. And so I'm going to make that all very clear. And I'm going to try to put an emphasis on that because it really, really is raising an eyebrow for a lot of people, and justifiably so. And so just so you guys know, there were a lot of eyewitnesses that spotted the shooter, and we're just going to say his name in order to, shame people. That's my principle. But you had Thomas Crooks. It's a fitting last name. I believe it was actually him who transported the ladder, because in earlier imagery, there wasn't actually a ladder present in this area of the barn. And so he was able to climb up and lay down in set position within this location over here. This is the general location of the shooter, although he rolled around after shooting the shots, and he moved farther away from this rightward edge. And you know that because based on BBC aerial view, there's the gun, the AR-15 that he sort of abandoned on the side here, and then he moved left a couple of feet. And so he was just trying to roll and I suppose evade some of the fire from the counter sniper teams further south. And so we'll get to that, of course. But he was positioned here, and the people that were able to see him first were at least two bystanders, but it's probably way higher because you had dozens, if not more, people that were outside the fenced up area of the rally itself, further south where I'm marking the larger rectangle. And they weren't able to physically see Trump, but they were, of course, listening to the events. And from that position over here in the small rectangle, you could, of course, see when somebody's climbing up and setting up an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle aiming towards the rally itself. It becomes pretty evident. And so then for a period of 3 to 4 minutes, they spotted the Crooks guy setting up his position and preparing to shoot. And they informed the local law enforcement. And this is where we get to a very important point about how the security apparatus around former presidents and just generally high value political individuals operates. And so when you're looking at individual of Trump status, former president, presumptive nominee for the GOP, what happens is if they're in a public event like this, especially outdoors, there has to be way stricter security. And so you have the first echelon of Secret Service. They are supposed to be the physical protection. So they're supposed to stand around the podium. And then if there's any sort of shots fired, they're supposed to come in and act as a human shield. And so we saw them try to do that at least and then move into the car last night. So that's the first level. Then you have the coordination with the local law enforcement. So that would be, I guess, the deputies from the Butler County region, the town itself. And so they're supposed to engage in crowd control and sort of the mid-level operations. So we're talking about in a radius of like 200, 400 meters away from the rally itself, trying to guard the perimeter, both physically, but then also with some shorter range guns, you could say. And then the third echelon, which is also very important to note, is the long range protection. And so they utilize cyber intelligence, of course. They also have these longer range rifles, aiming sometimes hundreds or thousands of meters away from the actual premises, trying to engage with long range threats. And so they're using signal intelligence and they're looking way deeper than potentially some nearby structures. And so then the issue is there sufficient communication between the mid-level echelon and the longer range protection? Because when you're looking at some of these security teams over here, like the second sniper team and the first sniper team, they were aiming with their guns, or they had the guns mounted generally in the same direction as where the shooter was located, even before it was known to anybody that the shooter was present in that particular region. And so they had a line of sight generally going northwards, I guess you could say more northeastwards in terms of its direction. And you could actually see, based on the footage recorded from before the entire ordeal, they had their guns pointed further up in an area which would not be able to actually fit within the range of sight of a nearby target, like where the shooter was located. So they were looking way deeper into the horizon. So for a period of 3 to 4 minutes, you had bystanders here that saw this individual climbing up, and they notified the local law enforcement. And then there's a question, why in the world were there not either Secret Service over here or local law enforcement standing atop the roof? Because of course you're going to have the sniper crews directly east of Trump. Trump's over here. Of course you're going to have two anti-sniper crews in this region over here. That's just logical. But then the next step would be to have them in the area that is directly looking over Trump's position, just about 130 meters north. Even though it's not within the rally premises itself, it is just so nearby and it just overlooks perfectly all of the rally and the crowd. You would expect for there to be a presence on these roofs. Now, from what I understand, there were actually police officers located within the building, which makes it even more suspect that there wouldn't be any on top of the roof. And this actually gets us to finally a new report from AP where they're saying that based on their own sources, there was a police officer that climbed up the ladder following the notifications from bystanders. And the Crooks guy, he aimed the gun at him, essentially tried to get him away. And so the police officer retreated. And only after that did the shooter actually begin firing onto Trump and onto the crowd. So not only did the bystanders inform the law enforcement, the mid-level echelon, for about 3 minutes or even more about the presence of what they thought was a hostile gunman over here, but they were also pointing towards the two barns over here where you had the sniper crews trying to indicate to them that there was an active shooter in this region, or that he was about to become active. And they were basically shouting he has a gun, that sort of a language. And, in a hectic situation, of course, there's a certain level of nuance, but definitely you could see based on the footage that the sniper crews were looking in the same direction. And let me show you something that's very interesting. So for the first sniper crew, or the two-man counter sniper crew over here on the northern barn, you can see how their line of sight directly crosses into this tree over here. And so imagine trying to basically aim over there from your slope position, and you're laying down, and you basically can't see directly northwards because of this tree over here. There's a lot of foliage in the way, so it would be extremely difficult. And so there's a good chance that they weren't even able to see him from that particular position. And that may also be why Crooks put himself in that region, because he wanted to conceal himself from the crews on the barn, and then also have a way to directly overlook Trump in a way that really is perfect when you look at the elevation comparison in the line of sight. Because you could see that based on the line of sight, it goes southwest over here, and it doesn't actually cross through the crosshairs of the tree. But then when you look at the second sniper crew further south, they can actually see, if you measure it with the stick, they actually can see very, very narrowly the positioning of Crooks, and they were the crew that ended up killing him eventually. And if Crooks had been stationed, or if he put himself a couple of meters, I would say, just to the east over here, closer to the edge, then at that point, it would be impossible for any sort of crew located in the southern barn to see him, because it would be blocked off by the view of these trees over here. And this brings me to a really important question. Why are there no drone crews operating here? At least one drone that's flying overhead to ensure that there isn't any sort of hostile threats, because we're talking about a rural area. We're talking about an open area that is so exposed, with so many people crowded into one area and nearby structures overlooking it. You need to have a drone crew, at least one drone that's flying over to get aerial shots to ensure that everything is going to plan with where the security apparatus is supposed to be located. So the fact that they didn't have a drone crew, which would have immediately spotted something like this, I just think that's insane. And the excuse that is now being mentioned is that there simply aren't enough resources for a former president, and that in terms of the security detail, it's different for a current president like Joe Biden, the sort of security that he receives, and then a former president and somebody who's running for president at the same time, like Trump. And so there's less resources being committed to that sort of protection. So then in terms of the actual gunshots, in the first round, there were 3 bullets that were fired in quick succession. And we could see this in basically every single video, whether it's coming from the podium region where Trump was standing, and you can see how the sort of bullet grazes his ear and how he falls down. That's one angle, but there are so many angles that are focusing on the sniper crew, and you hear the same thing. There's also a video from a bystander that was also located in the area where I'm hovering my cursor, looking towards the barn where he was firing from, Crooks. And even before he shot the bullet, there were already people there that knew that he was about to begin firing, because they saw him in position and they started screaming. And we also heard from that perspective the 3 initial bullets being fired. And then there was a bit of a pause, I believe for 5 seconds. And then there was another 5 bullets that rang off. And then here's the question, because I know it's by now commonly reported that he only fired 5 bullets. Initially, people were saying 8, but I could hear in all the videos a total of 8 bullets being fired initially. So maybe I'm just mishearing it, but it seemed to me like all of those 8 had a pretty similar shot pattern. But, maybe I'm wrong, and some of the bullets that were fired during that exchange of gunfire were actually coming from the counter-sniping side. But what I know for sure is that the 9th bullet that was fired, which came about 15 seconds after the initial 3 bullets were fired by Crooks, that one was fired from the Southern Sniper Squad from this barn over here, and that's what ended up killing him. Now, here's the really insane part. So the first bullet is the one that hit Trump's top right ear. It's the first one, and it's the one that grazed him. And you can see that based on the first sound that you hear and then Trump's immediate reaction. And of course, he has to duck down. That's sort of the protocol in that sort of situation. And then the Secret Service huddles on top of him. And the thing is, imagine Trump is located over here in this blue marker. I'm going to mark it in yellow for you guys. And then he looks forward towards the crowd over here. So Trump is positioned in this sort of direction, and his right ear is located in this X marking over here. So Trump He was standing right over here, and he had turned in the previous 30 seconds towards this sort of right word orientation because he was pointing and looking at a large screen because there was a graphic up there. So he was just pointing and discussing it at the same time. And due to that change in orientation, that slight change in orientation, there wasn't actually, the bullet didn't actually go through its intended particular area. It went through his ear, of course, and grazed it, which isn't life threatening. But had he oriented his essentially his entire face, entire head in a more sort of 180-degree style, facing directly towards the crowd and not facing more rightwards, at that point, it would have been pretty likely that the bullet would have hit directly through his skull and went into his brain. And at that point, it is very lethal. And that's one component. The other component is the fact that at the same time period, there were westerly winds of 5 miles per hour heading, I believe, in this particular direction. So it's coming from the west, of course, and going east. And that may have also played a role in slightly changing the trajectory of the bullet and slightly moving it off course away from Trump's actual head where it was intended and slightly more to the right in an area that it hit his ear instead. So we addressed some concerns in relation to the coordination between different echelons of security. And that's a big issue because, 3 to 4 minutes of a lack of communication between the higher tier echelon where you had these very snipers over here looking for a certain gunman, and then actually the people on the ground that are supposed to guard the perimeter. That is extremely concerning for that certain period of time, even though, hearing from all directions about different reports, it does cause a frenzy. That is a significant period of time, and it is in a relatively close area. We talked about drones, which I think is being under discussed and it really should be talked about more. But also, there really should be a crew here that's equipped with long guns, not just snipers, which, they're looking very far away and they're very narrow in their field of vision. And so then if you want to redirect your sights towards the area closer, you need to redirect the tripod and then move it down a little. You have to actually look away from the scope in order to see where you're actually going to redirect towards. And that's taking a lot of time in terms of relative terms, a couple of seconds, and those are decisive moments, and you really don't have that sort of leeway when you're talking about a life and death situation. And so there has to be more accountability and more people accounting for all the different types of scenarios. Now, in terms of the aftermath generally, following the bullet that grazed Trump, there were additional bullets that rained down into nearby areas, including into the podium in the crowd that I was talking about. And just awfully, it led to the death of at least one person. There are 2 others that are in critical condition at the moment. And we also know, based on reporting, that the FBI found explosives within Crook's car and also within his home. And so now they're, of course, sweeping through his house and looking for hard drives that assume something, a journal where he may have wrote anything. And so that's going to be really important to see if we get concrete information to understand what his motives actually were. So I really hope that analysis was helpful in understanding the layout of what happened. And there's going to be so many political repercussions that are going to unfold over the coming weeks. And so I'll leave that for actual political commentators. But now let's go to look at the front line. I'm going to do this in quick succession, but we're going to begin with Krasnohorivka. So we understand that the Russian forces were able to develop a breakthrough into the western portion of the town recently, taking over some of Ukraine's most important positions, including apartment complexes and hospitals. They were able to advance over 1 kilometer. We all know that. And it seems like the Ukrainians are trying to redivert Russian attention away from that particular development to try to buy time for the forces in the remaining parts of northwestern Krasnohorivka and the northern suburbs over there, by trying to send in small squads along this specific paved road, which I think is running along this rail line. So this is one of the final entrance points that the Ukrainians control into Krasnohorivka. So they're using it as a means by which to continue the assaults and continue to try to divert Russian attention towards an area that they had previously cleared. And this is based on Ukrainian reporting, because Deep State and Petrenko for a while now have had this southern district as under full Russian control, although they said, and I also marked it as these warehouses still being under Ukrainian control. So now that's changed because we have a video from not June 12th, but let's go to this other one from July 13th. It's a video showing Russian shelling of Ukrainian squads that were operating in the houses in southwestern Krasnohorivka. And so Russian sources acknowledge that they've been forced now to shell for a while Ukrainian squads that are coming in and out of these houses. And so they're not fully cleared yet. And I believe it is a part of a larger distraction campaign. And then looking further north at Novoselivka Persha, we now have updates from Ukrainian sources indicating that the Russian forces not only control the entirety of this vertical road leading from Umansk into Persha, but they have also been able to advance several hundred meters west of it. Let's see, about 300 meters westwards, trying to get control over that southern flank of the village, trying to get control over the hills overlooking Persha, but also overlooking some nearby Ukrainian villages east or now west of the Vovchansk River, including Skuchnie, this village over here, Mezhove, etc., etc. Looking at Novoselivka Persha itself, the Ukrainians are steadfast in their defense here, and so there's really heavy fighting unfolding. We have footage that was actually recorded on July 12th, but is now being published. It shows a video of the 47th Mechanized Brigade sending in their reinforcements to this region. We know the 47th was and still is really defending in Prokhorez and Vovche, previously in Sokil. And now they've also been sent to this theater a bit further south to help create this sort of stopgap and prevent the Russians from further advances in the region. And so they're moving in their tank battalions. They're also moving in mechanized forces. So here they have a Bradley that moved in along with two other armored vehicles. And of course, they're coming through this particular crossing of the river. And that's why it's so important for the Russians to physically control it, or at least get close enough to fire towards that region, which is why the Russians even advanced towards this northwestern flank of Persha in the first place. And so what we saw in the video released by the Ukrainian side was the movement of the vehicles across the river and into the village itself. And some of them actually went all the way up to this tree line a bit further north, where there were active engagements going on, and delivered fire from the Bushmaster. They were firing towards the Russian positions just a couple of hundred meters north over here along this horizontal road, trying to suppress the Russians as they dismounted their own squad into the tree line over here that took up positions and tried to maintain control over the northern flank. So we've seen the Ukrainians readily using Bradleys, especially in engagements here like Sokil or going to Sloviove, Berdichi, Avdiivka, especially using the Bushmaster, of course, the 25 millimeter chain gun towards soldiers within houses, but also Russia's own vehicles. And it's not just that we're seeing on repeat. We didn't see Abrams involved yet in the engagements here, which is interesting. But we do know that the Ukrainian FPVs, crews from the Strike Drones Company, a part of the 47th Brigade, they're still on a daily basis uploading videos of their strikes onto advancing Russian soldiers through Sokil, Voskod, and Avdiivka. So there was one from the Sokil region earlier today. But this is a video that was recorded by the Russian side. It shows two Russian soldiers walking westwards towards a forested area just north of Sokil. And so you could see their vector of advance. It started out in some of these trenches near the railway embankment, so they may have been coming from Ocheretine. And this is an area that is just filled with a lot of shrubbery, and it is an advantageous position to fire from and to advance through because of the local height that is situated just north of Sokil. And so the drone just shows how the two Russian soldiers make their way all the way to this specific assortment of forested areas. And this is a part of the vector of attack that the Russian soldiers at the vanguard used to even reach towards these fields over here that are directly to the east of Prokhorez and Vovche. Additionally, we know that the Russian forces have slowly advanced just south of Vozhvizhenka. In terms of the extent, it's not anything significant, but now the gains are becoming more marginal because you have the Russians advancing through a very, very narrow pass. They don't have control over the flanks to the north or to the south, and those are located on heights. But I think for now they've really been rendered a gray zone where no side is really utilizing them. And so it's more so a Russian effort of sending in infantry on foot, trying to reach as close as possible, utilizing the cover of tree foliage and trying to infiltrate into trenches and towards roads that try to undermine the Ukrainian defense here and force them to get pushed back even further to the northwest along the same road that bisects Novoselivka. It makes its way all the way to the ring road just about 6 kilometers to the northwest. Now looking at New York, we do have a slight update. And so as I said in my last video, my mapping here is a bit off, and it's from previous mappings that I did like a year ago. So don't read into this red area over here that I'm marking. This is currently a gray zone and not under Russian control, but I have no way of editing it on the map. The real Russian control is based on the orange lines that I'm going to mark over here for you guys. But nonetheless, what we see is that the Russian forces were able to advance an additional, you could say, 1.5 kilometers westwards. Their vector of attack and advance is now not going vertically northwards. They're trying to broaden control of this axis. They're trying to ensure that their flanks are secure. But a big reason why this is being done is so they get control over some of these frontline trenches, frontline forested areas that you see marked over here in the green colors, forested tree lines, all of that. And the reason why is because this hinterlands between this chain of villages over here and Urivka is located on a really highly elevated region. And so that local height not only overlooks New York, which is important because the Russians don't really have the immediate high ground in the battles in New York. They are on similar elevation to the Ukrainians. It also overlooks the entire line of defense that was built horizontally to connect between New York and villages located 10 kilometers westwards. And if we look westwards, we'll see that it includes villages like Novoselivka, and so also immediately it overlooks the highway going northwards over here in this direction. I think it's the H20 highway, if I'm not mistaken, that leads all the way up north and connects to the highway with Krasnohorivka. And then on the most immediate level, it overlooks villages on the front line like Alexandropil and other villages that are now about to reach the line of contact that are all located on a local river valley. Now looking at the Seversk front, this isn't necessarily new news, but it is an acknowledgement by Ukrainian sources that the Russian forces have been able to infiltrate into Rozdolivka. And so they're showing the Russians pushing 700 meters into, or 600 into the village itself, with the northern portion remaining a gray zone. Additionally, Ukrainian sources like Petrenko are now acknowledging that the horizontal line of defense built by the Ukrainians to connect between the rail line to the east and the Bakhmutovka River and Perizhne to the west has basically faltered, with the Russian forces advancing a significant amount in this region, pushing through open fields and advancing over 2 kilometers northwards, and doing this across a pretty wide front if you're going to measure it, a front of nearly 4 kilometers wide, capturing various assortments, forests, dugouts, trenches that were in their building phase, trying to get them expanded. And the entire reason why they were built is in order to prevent a Russian attack vector developing just south of Seversk in an area that is not that fortified, and in an area that has two different vectors that are low-lying and are not well protected that the Russians could eventually fire upon and then advance through. And so that's the reason why Rozdolivka has turned into a battleground. The Ukrainians wanted to buy time and keep the Russian attention on this one village while they tried to send in reinforcements to hold the line along this trench system over here. But the Russian forces, while they haven't been able to fully take over Rozdolivka, they're nearly about to. They have been able to breach this Ukrainian line, which will have really big implications for the situation here going forward for these fields directly north, located on heights, overlooking Vimka, overlooking all these other villages just to the west, and most importantly, overlooking Seversk itself, which is located on a river valley just to the north of it. On the northern border, we have 3 updates. First of all, we have this video that came out from the Russian side. It's showing them with their FPV just hitting towards a building that is just north of the Vovchansk school number 2. And this is confirmation of a Ukrainian presence in a region that was previously imagined to be about 100 meters away from the Ukrainian frontline positions. And so it is a confirmation of a slight advance in this region and shows how the Russian forces are trying to strike that particular area. It also shows how the line of connection with the aggregate plant, although it is still present, you can understand why the fighting here is so drawn out and how it does become dangerous on a day-to-day basis to cross over the corridor and maintain a constant flood of supply and physical connection. You have Russian sources claiming that the Russians have been able to further exploit their alleged bridgehead south of the Vovcha River and actually advance into Preluzhna Street over here. I still can't confirm this because I haven't seen footage yet of a Russian squad crossing over the river and taking over these houses. And so we really do have to wait and see on that. But definitely keep an eye out for what's surrounding this region, because it's now the second update in the course of a week of Russian sources alleging that this is actually the case, and they have not yet retracted those claims. And now looking at the region around Hlyboke, this is important because we do know the Ukrainians do have a vector of attack in the northern parts of Hlyboke. This is due to the fact that Ukrainians were able to advance from northern Lipsy, get control over local roads and fields, and then advance eastwards with armored vehicles, dismount squads within the northern warehouses where the Russians have these trenches that were built by the Ukrainians. Now the Ukrainians are in control of them once again. So we know about the northern section being under Ukrainian control, and we know about the western section being under intense bombardment and back and forth fighting. But that's not enough to actually say the Russians fully lost Hlyboke, and that's something that I was adamant about. And now it appears to be confirmed that the Russians, in a certain capacity, are still operating here. And so the 1st Assault Battalion of the 92nd Assault Brigade, they released a video on July 14th of their drones dropping a grenade onto 2 Russian soldiers directly in the ruins of Hlyboke. And it shows you how all these structures over here have suffered extensive damage. Most are still standing, but again, it's unrecognizable. You can see how some of them are rather large structures, some of them are duplexes or apartment buildings. And they also confirmed to us that the Ukrainians have not gotten full control over this region, even though they control the northern flank. An area where it is alleged that the Ukrainians have been able to get full control back of, and this is also confirmed by some Russian sources, is this village, Sotnitsky Kosachok. We knew about 2 Russian infiltration attempts over here over the past month, and one of them from like 2 weeks ago was actually successful, with Deep State at least claiming the Russians were able to fully secure the region and that it was a part of expanded DRG operations that were trying to go even deeper into the border over here. And it appears to me that it was never a serious attempt at opening a new part of the front line. At the time I said it because we didn't see any units being moved into this area. It appears that just sometimes the Russians increase the tempo of attacks in a certain region to divert Ukrainian attention towards that region, but also to actually achieve local objectives, for instance, to destroy a Ukrainian stronghold in a certain region. But that by no means that they're going to have full permanent control in a gray zone like the border over here, which is extremely dangerous. And we can see that with this video from Deep State that they released from July 13th of a Russian squad operating in this part of the village, getting shelled by the Ukrainians before their eventual withdrawal a couple hundred meters north into their part of the border, which you can see marked over here, just going back to their side. And now Deep State and other Russian sources are claiming that the Ukrainians have reestablished a presence within said village. So yeah, that's all I have for today. Hopefully you found this video useful, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.